There is a sentence that quietly changes the direction of a person's entire life the moment they truly understand it. The hero you've been waiting for is you, not someone arriving later, not someone more qualified, more prepared, more ready. You, exactly as you are right now, standing in the exact circumstances you currently occupy. Think about that slowly, because most people spend years waiting for a version of rescue that was never going to come from outside themselves. Here is what most people do without realizing it. They imagine their life changing through some external arrival, a mentor who finally notices their potential, an opportunity that finally opens the right door, a moment of luck that finally tips things in their favor. And while they wait for that external hero to appear, their own life sits in a kind of suspended animation, paused indefinitely for a rescue that exists mostly in imagination. Think about how deeply this waiting gets embedded into daily thinking. It doesn't always look like obvious inaction. Sometimes it looks like busy activity, constant movement, endless preparation. But underneath all of that motion, the real belief remains unchanged, that something outside of you still needs to arrive before your life can truly begin. That belief, quiet and mostly unconscious, is often the single biggest obstacle standing between where you are and where you want to be. Now understand something important. This is not a story about self-reliance in the cold, isolated sense some people imagine. It is not a rejection of help, support, or community. Mentors matter, friends matter, opportunities matter, but none of them were ever meant to replace the one thing only you can provide: the decision to act, the discipline to continue, the willingness to become the person capable of using whatever help eventually arrives. Help accelerates a life already in motion. It rarely creates motion out of nothing. Think about every meaningful transformation you've witnessed in someone else's life, or read about, or admired from a distance. In almost every case, look closely enough and you'll find the same pattern. The turning point wasn't someone else's rescue. It was a decision made internally, often quietly, often without an audience, long before any external support arrived to make the journey easier. The hero of that story was never someone who showed up from outside. It was the person who finally stopped waiting for someone to show up. Now let's talk about why this truth feels difficult to accept at first. Believing someone else needs to rescue you is, in a strange way, more comfortable than accepting full responsibility for your own life. If someone else is supposed to arrive and fix things, then the current situation isn't entirely your fault, and neither is the outcome if things stay the same. But the moment you accept that you are the hero this story has been waiting for, comfort disappears, replaced by something both heavier and more powerful: full ownership. Think about what full ownership actually requires. It requires giving up the quiet excuse that circumstances, other people, or timing are responsible for where you currently stand. That excuse, while uncomfortable to release, was also protecting you from the weight of full responsibility. Letting it go means accepting that if your life is going to change, the person responsible for that change has been available the entire time, closer than any external rescue could ever be, because that person is you. Now, here's where this understanding needs to go deeper, because accepting ownership in theory and living it in practice are two very different experiences. And the gap between them is exactly where most people quietly get stuck, right at the edge of a truth they've intellectually accepted, but haven't yet allowed to actually change their daily behavior. Think about that gap for a moment, because it explains why so many people can read something like this, nod in agreement, feel genuinely moved by it, and then return to the exact same patterns within days. Understanding a truth intellectually costs nothing. It requires no risk, no discomfort, no exposure. But living that truth requires something else entirely, actually behaving as though the responsibility is yours, in situations where the old habit of waiting would have been so much easier. Here is what that gap actually looks like in daily life. It looks like agreeing in a quiet, reflective moment that you are responsible for your own progress. And then, an hour later, catching yourself hoping a friend will finally check in and hold you accountable instead of holding yourself accountable directly. It looks like accepting, intellectually, that no mentor is required to begin, and then quietly delaying the first step until you've found one anyway, just in case. The belief changes before the behavior does, and that lag is where most transformations quietly die. Now understand something important about closing this gap. It is not closed through more understanding. You do not need a deeper realization, a more convincing argument, or additional motivation to finally make the shift real. What closes the gap is a single, specific action, taken in a moment where the old pattern would have been easier, chosen instead of that old pattern, deliberately, without waiting for the feeling of readiness to arrive first. Think about the first time you actually act as your own hero in a real situation, rather than simply agreeing with the idea in the abstract. It rarely feels triumphant. It often feels small, uncertain, even anticlimactic. You solve a problem yourself instead of waiting for someone else to solve it. You keep a commitment on a day when breaking it would have gone completely unnoticed. Nothing dramatic marks the moment, but that ordinary, unremarkable action is exactly what begins closing the gap between belief and behavior, one small instance at a time. Now let's talk about why this first action tends to feel disproportionately difficult compared to how simple it actually is. The difficulty isn't really about the action itself. Solving a small problem alone, or keeping a small promise to yourself, isn't objectively hard. The difficulty comes from breaking a pattern that has been running quietly in the background for years, sometimes decades. The pattern of looking outward first, checking whether help or permission or company is available before proceeding. Interrupting that automatic pattern requires a kind of friction that has nothing to do with the difficulty of the task, and everything to do with the unfamiliarity of doing it differently. Think about how this unfamiliarity fades with repetition, the same way any new pattern eventually starts to feel normal once it's been practiced enough times. The first time you act without waiting for someone else to go first, it feels exposed, almost reckless, even when the actual stakes are small. The 10th time, it feels considerably more natural. By the 100th time, acting as your own hero has stopped being a decision requiring conscious effort and has quietly become simply how you operate, without the internal negotiation that once accompanied every instance. Now let's talk about what tends to interrupt this repetition before it has a chance to become natural, because understanding the specific obstacle in advance makes it far easier to move through when it arrives. The most common interruption is a single setback, one instance where acting independently doesn't go well, where the outcome disappoints, where the absence of outside help genuinely does make things harder than they might have been otherwise. This single setback often gets treated as definitive proof that the entire approach was wrong, when in reality, it was simply one data point among many no more conclusive than a single success would have been. Think about how differently this setback gets interpreted, depending on which identity you're currently operating from. Someone still partially waiting for external rescue interprets the setback as confirmation that they needed help all along, evidence that acting alone was a mistake. Someone who has more fully accepted the identity of their own hero interprets the exact same setback completely differently, as useful information about what to adjust next time, not as a verdict on whether the entire approach deserves to be abandoned. Now think about which of these two interpretations you tend to default to, because most people don't choose consciously. The interpretation arrives automatically, shaped entirely by which identity has been more deeply practiced up to that point. This is exactly why the early repetitions matter so much. Each time you interpret a setback as information rather than verdict, you strengthen the identity of someone capable of handling difficulty directly. Each time you interpret it as proof that rescue was necessary all along, You strengthen the older pattern instead, making the next setback even more likely to trigger the same retreat back toward waiting. Here's something worth sitting with honestly. Nobody moves through this shift without experiencing setbacks along the way. The absence of setbacks was never the actual marker of progress. The marker of progress is what you do immediately after a setback occurs. Whether you use it as evidence to retreat or as information to adjust and continue moving forward anyway. That single choice, repeated across every setback you encounter, is where the identity of your own hero either solidifies or quietly erodes back into its previous form. Now let's talk about something that often goes unaddressed in this conversation, the specific loneliness that can accompany this shift, at least initially. Waiting for external rescue, even when it never arrives, offers a strange kind of companionship, because the hope itself feels like it's shared with an imagined helper who is supposedly on their way. Releasing that hope and accepting full responsibility instead can feel isolating at first, as though you've suddenly been left standing alone in a situation that used to feel, at least emotionally, like it involved someone else. Think about this loneliness carefully, though, because it is temporary and it is not actually accurate. Accepting responsibility for your own life does not mean you are now permanently alone in facing it. It means you've stopped making your forward motion dependent on companionship arriving first. Genuine connection, genuine support, genuine help, none of that disappears. What disappears is the specific expectation that those things must arrive before you're allowed to begin moving. Once you've begun moving under your own initiative, connection and support often become more available, not less, because you're no longer approaching relationships from a place of waiting to be rescued, but from a place of already being in motion, inviting others to join rather than requiring them to lead. Now let's talk about a specific pattern worth recognizing in your own daily language, because language often reveals which identity is currently operating beneath the surface, even before you're consciously aware of it. Listen to how often phrases like, "I'm waiting to see," or "I'm not sure yet," or "we'll see what happens," show up in your own internal narration about your goals. These phrases, while sounding neutral or even patient, often carry a quiet assumption underneath them, that the next move depends on something external clarifying itself first, rather than being something you could simply decide and act on directly, right now, regardless of remaining uncertainty. Think about replacing that language, not as some superficial trick, but as a genuine reflection of a different underlying stance. Instead of "I'm waiting to see," consider what it would mean to say, even privately, "I'm going to find out by trying." Instead of "we'll see what happens," consider "I'm going to make something happen," and adjust from there. These aren't just different words. They represent a fundamentally different relationship with uncertainty. One that treats uncertainty as something to move through via action, rather than something requiring more information or more waiting before movement becomes appropriate. Now let's talk about how this entire shift eventually stabilizes into something that no longer requires constant conscious effort to maintain. Early on, choosing to act as your own hero requires deliberate, sometimes exhausting attention, because you're actively overriding a pattern that has operated automatically for years. But identity, once sufficiently reinforced through repetition, eventually takes over that function itself. You stop having to consciously decide in each new situation whether to wait or to act. The decision starts happening automatically, the same way any well-practiced identity eventually operates, without requiring constant, deliberate reinforcement. Think about what this stabilization actually feels like once it arrives, because it's worth understanding in advance, so you recognize it when it happens, rather than dismissing it as insignificant. It doesn't feel triumphant or dramatic. It feels quiet, almost boring in its consistency. Situations that once triggered an automatic scan for outside help now simply trigger direct action instead, without the internal negotiation that used to precede it. You stop noticing the absence of rescue because you've stopped expecting rescue to be part of the equation at all. The waiting simply isn't there anymore to notice. Now let's talk about what this stabilized identity makes possible that wasn't available before, because the benefits extend well beyond simply completing individual tasks more independently. Once you're no longer spending energy on the internal debate between waiting and acting, that energy becomes available for something far more valuable: actual problem solving, actual skill development, actual forward motion, unclouded by the exhausting background process of checking whether outside help has arrived yet. People who reach this stabilized identity often describe feeling lighter, not because their responsibilities have decreased, but because the mental overhead of negotiating those responsibilities has finally quieted. Think about how much capacity gets freed up once decision fatigue around this specific question disappears. Deciding over and over whether to wait or to act consumes real cognitive energy, even when it happens unconsciously. Once the identity stabilizes and acting becomes the default, rather than something requiring active decision each time, that energy redirects entirely toward the work itself, rather than toward the recurring internal argument about whether the work should begin without outside involvement first. Now, let's talk about a subtle danger that can emerge once this identity has stabilized. Because even a strength taken too far without balance can become its own kind of limitation. Someone who has fully internalized the identity of their own hero can sometimes drift toward rejecting legitimate help, even when it would genuinely accelerate their progress, treating any request for support as a betrayal of the independence they've worked hard to build. This isn't the goal. The goal was never total isolation. It was removing the requirement that help arrive before movement begins, not eliminating help's usefulness once movement is already underway. Think about the difference between healthy self-reliance and this overcorrected version of it. Healthy self-reliance says, I don't need rescue to begin, but I welcome genuine support once I'm already moving. Overcorrected self-reliance says, I don't need anyone, ever, for anything, which is not strength but a different kind of imbalance, often rooted in the same underlying fear that originally created the waiting pattern: fear of vulnerability, fear of depending on something outside your own control. True stability includes the flexibility to accept help without feeling that acceptance threatens the identity you've built. Now let's bring this back to something practical, because all of this understanding needs to translate into an actual next step, not remain purely conceptual. Think about the specific situations currently sitting in your life where you've been quietly waiting for something external to shift before you begin. It might be small, it might feel significant. Regardless of scale, the pattern operates identically. A decision currently postponed, waiting for conditions, people, or circumstances that were never actually required for that decision to be made. Think about what it would look like to treat that situation differently starting today, not through some elaborate plan, but through one direct, deliberate action that doesn't wait for the external factor you've been quietly hoping would arrive first. This action doesn't need to solve the entire situation. It needs only to demonstrate to yourself through direct evidence that movement was always available, regardless of whether the hoped-for external support ever showed up at all. Now understand something about the accumulated effect of these individual actions, because no single instance carries the full weight of the transformation on its own. Each action, taken independently, contributes to a growing body of evidence. Evidence that contradicts the older belief that rescue was required. Evidence that slowly, action by action, rebuilds trust in your own capability to handle what's in front of you, regardless of whether anyone else ever arrives to help carry it. Think about how this accumulated evidence eventually starts to outweigh years of the opposite belief, the belief that told you for so long that you were somehow incomplete without external rescue arriving first. Beliefs built over years don't dissolve instantly, no matter how compelling a single insight feels in the moment you first encounter it. They erode gradually, the same way they were built gradually, through repeated experience rather than a single decisive argument. This is worth remembering on the days when the old belief resurfaces, quiet but familiar, whispering that maybe this time really is different. Maybe this time waiting really is the wiser choice. Here's what makes that whisper so persuasive, even after real progress has been made. It doesn't usually arrive as a full return to the old pattern. It arrives disguised as a single reasonable exception, a specific situation that seems to genuinely require outside intervention before movement makes sense. And sometimes, to be fair, that's actually true. There are legitimate moments where waiting for specific information or specific collaboration genuinely makes more sense than acting immediately. The skill being built here isn't the elimination of all patience or all waiting. It's the ability to distinguish between strategic patience, chosen deliberately, and habitual waiting, defaulted into automatically out of old fear. Think about how to tell these two apart in practice, because the distinction matters enormously, despite how similar they can look from the outside. Strategic patience comes with a clear reason, a specific condition being waited for, and a defined point at which action proceeds, regardless of whether that condition has been met. Habitual waiting, by contrast, tends to be vague, open-ended, without a clear trigger point, extending indefinitely, because no specific condition was ever actually identified. Just a general sense that circumstances aren't quite right yet. A feeling that could just as easily persist for another year as for another week. Now let's talk about how to apply this distinction directly to the situation you identified earlier, the one you've been quietly waiting on. Ask yourself honestly which category that waiting actually falls into. Is there a specific identifiable condition you're genuinely waiting for, with a clear point at which you'll proceed regardless? Or has the waiting become open-ended, vague, sustained more by comfort and familiarity than by any actual strategic reasoning? Most people, being honest with themselves, discover that far more of their waiting falls into the second category than they initially assumed. Think about what changes once you can see this distinction clearly in your own life. Suddenly, the waiting that felt justified starts to look, upon closer inspection, like the same old pattern, wearing a slightly more sophisticated disguise. And once you see through that disguise, it becomes much harder to keep accepting it uncritically the way you might have before this entire conversation began. Now let's talk about what happens over the longer arc of a life fully lived under this new identity, because the changes extend far beyond any single situation or decision. A person who has genuinely internalized the understanding that they are their own hero approaches every new challenge differently than they once did. Setbacks get processed as information rather than verdicts. Uncertainty gets met with willingness to move forward and adjust, rather than paralysis waiting for clarity that was never actually required. Support, when it arrives, gets welcomed as acceleration rather than treated as a prerequisite. And perhaps most significantly, the quiet, chronic anxiety of waiting for something outside yourself to finally arrive and fix things simply stops being part of daily experience, replaced by a steadier, more grounded relationship with whatever difficulty shows up next. Think about how much of the exhaustion people carry through life isn't actually caused by the difficulties themselves, but by the constant background, waiting layered on top of those difficulties, waiting for rescue, waiting for permission, waiting for someone else to make the first move. Removing that layer doesn't make the difficulties disappear. It simply removes the additional weight of waiting alongside them, leaving only the difficulty itself, which is almost always more manageable once it's no longer accompanied by that exhausting parallel hope for external intervention. Now let's talk about what all of this means. The next time you find yourself standing at the edge of a decision, sensing the old pull toward waiting creeping, dressed in whatever reasonable sounding language it tends to use with you specifically. Maybe it says you need more information first. Maybe it says the timing isn't quite right yet. Maybe it says someone more experienced should really be the one to take the lead here, not you. Whatever specific words it uses, the underlying message is always the same one you've been learning to recognize throughout this entire message. That you are somehow not yet enough, not yet ready, not yet the person capable of moving forward without something or someone else arriving first. Think about how differently you're now equipped to respond to that message compared to before. You understand now that readiness isn't something that arrives before action. It gets built through action itself, through repeated exposure to exactly the kind of uncertainty that used to trigger retreat. You understand that setbacks are information, not verdicts, and that a single difficult outcome was never sufficient evidence to abandon an entire approach. You understand the difference between strategic patience, chosen deliberately with a clear endpoint, and habitual waiting, defaulted into indefinitely out of old familiar fear. And most importantly, you understand that the identity of your own hero isn't something reserved for people who have already proven themselves through some external validation. It's available the moment you decide to start acting as though it's already true. Now let's talk about something worth acknowledging honestly before this message closes. None of this removes difficulty from your life. Becoming your own hero doesn't mean challenges stop being challenging, or that setbacks stop feeling uncomfortable when they occur, or that uncertainty stops carrying its natural weight. What changes isn't the difficulty itself. What changes is your relationship to that difficulty. Whether you face it directly, with the quiet confidence of someone who has proven, through repeated direct experience, that they can handle what shows up, or whether you continue facing it indirectly, filtered through the exhausting hope that something outside yourself will eventually arrive and make the difficulty smaller before you have to engage with it fully. Think about which of these two relationships with difficulty you'd rather carry forward into the rest of your life, because this is really the choice underneath everything covered here. It was never a choice about whether difficulty exists. Difficulty exists regardless for everyone, without exception. The actual choice is about how you meet that difficulty when it arrives. Waiting for rescue that may or may not come, on a timeline you cannot control, or moving forward under your own initiative, building capability and confidence through the process itself, regardless of what external support does or doesn't eventually show up alongside it. Now consider one more time the specific situation you identified earlier in this message, the one where waiting has quietly become the default. Think about what it would mean to treat that situation, starting today, as though the hero it's been waiting for has already arrived. Because in the most practical sense, that's exactly what's true. Not a future version of you, more prepared, more confident, more ready. You, exactly as you currently are, holding exactly the capability you currently hold, which, as this entire message has tried to demonstrate, is almost always more than enough to begin, even if it doesn't yet feel like enough to finish. Think about beginning as the only requirement right now, not finishing, not guaranteeing a particular outcome, simply beginning directly, without the familiar detour of waiting for permission or partnership or perfect conditions first. That beginning, however small it looks from the outside, is where every meaningful transformation covered throughout this message actually started. Not with a dramatic declaration, not with elaborate preparation, but with one ordinary action taken by one ordinary person who had simply decided to stop waiting. Now understand the deeper truth this entire message has been building toward from its very first sentence. Heroism, in the sense that actually changes a life, was never about exceptional circumstances or extraordinary talent. It was always about ordinary people in ordinary situations, choosing to act despite fear, despite doubt, despite the complete absence of any guarantee that things would work out the way they hoped. That kind of heroism doesn't require an audience to validate it, doesn't require external permission to begin, and doesn't require certainty to justify the first step. It only requires the willingness to accept a responsibility that, whether you've noticed it or not, has been sitting with you the entire time, waiting patiently for you to finally pick it up. Think about the version of your life, waiting quietly on the other side of that decision, not delivered to you through someone else's rescue, but built directly, deliberately, through your own consistent effort, your own willingness to move forward without waiting for external validation first, your own decision to finally stop hoping for a hero and start becoming one instead. That version of your life isn't distant or abstract. It is simply the accumulated result of choices available to you right now, requiring nothing except your willingness to begin making them. The hero you've been waiting for is you, not someone arriving later, more qualified, more ready. You, exactly as you are, standing exactly where you currently stand, holding exactly the capability required to take the next step. Stop waiting, start acting, and build, through consistent daily decisions, the life that has always been waiting for exactly one thing to finally begin. You accepting completely and directly the responsibility and the power that have belonged to you the entire time. Now, before this message closes completely, there is one more layer worth understanding, because it changes how you carry everything covered here into the days and weeks ahead, long after this specific moment of listening has passed. Understanding a truth once is not the same as living inside it permanently. The mind has a tendency to absorb insight, feel genuinely moved by it, and then quietly drift back toward older, more familiar patterns once the initial impact fades. This is not a personal failing. It is simply how change tends to work for almost everyone, which is exactly why what happens after this message matters more than the message itself. Think about what it would mean to build a kind of checkpoint into your own thinking, a moment you deliberately return to whenever you notice the old waiting pattern quietly resurfacing. It doesn't need to be complicated. It can be as simple as asking yourself in that exact moment, whether you're about to make a decision rooted in strategic patience, chosen deliberately, or whether you're slipping back into habitual waiting, defaulted into out of old comfort. That single question, asked honestly and consistently, becomes a kind of internal safeguard, catching the pattern before it fully reestablishes itself. Now let's talk about why this checkpoint matters so much more than it might initially seem to. Without it, the old pattern doesn't return all at once in some easily recognizable form. It returns gradually, one small exception at a time, each one seeming reasonable in isolation. Just this once, waiting makes sense. Just this specific situation genuinely requires outside input first. Each individual exception feels harmless, even responsible. But exceptions accumulate the same way consistent action accumulates. And without a checkpoint to interrupt that accumulation, the identity you've worked to build can erode slowly, without any single dramatic moment marking its disappearance. Think about protecting this identity the same way you'd protect anything else you've invested real effort into building. It requires ongoing maintenance, not because the initial understanding was insufficient, but because identity, by nature, is built and sustained through repetition, not secured permanently through a single realization. The people who maintain this identity longest aren't the ones who never feel the old pull toward waiting again. They're the ones who've built a reliable way of noticing that pull quickly and choosing differently again and again for as long as it takes to become nearly automatic. Now let's talk about what it looks like to extend this identity beyond your own individual challenges, into how you show up for the people around you as well. Someone who has genuinely internalized the understanding that they are their own hero often becomes without necessarily intending it, a different kind of presence for others still caught in the waiting pattern themselves. Not through lectures, not through repeatedly explaining the concept, but simply through consistent demonstration, through visibly handling difficulty directly, through visibly not requiring rescue to keep moving forward, through visibly welcoming help when it's offered without ever making your own progress conditional on it arriving. Think about the quiet influence this kind of consistency has on people who witness it regularly. It doesn't convince anyone through argument. It convinces through evidence, the same way your own transformation was built through evidence rather than persuasion. Someone watching you handle a setback directly, without collapsing into waiting for someone else to fix it, absorbs something from that example, whether or not either of you ever discusses it explicitly. This is, in many ways, the most sustainable form of influence available. Not telling people to stop waiting for a hero, but simply becoming visible proof that the shift is actually possible. Now, as this message comes to its close, think one final time about the specific situation sitting in your own life right now, the one you identified earlier, the one that's been quietly waiting on something external before it can move forward. Everything covered in this message points toward the same simple, direct conclusion. That situation is not actually waiting for anything external at all. It has been waiting for you specifically to stop treating yourself as insufficient for the task and start treating yourself as exactly what the task has required from the very beginning. Think about what happens the moment you finally accept that fully, not as an abstract idea to admire, but as a description of your actual current capability. The waiting doesn't need another day to continue. The rescue you've been quietly hoping for doesn't need to arrive from anywhere else, because it was never actually missing. It was only ever obscured by the belief that you needed to be someone other than who you currently are before you were allowed to begin. The hero you've been waiting for is you, not someday, not once conditions finally align. Right now, exactly as you are, holding exactly the capability this moment requires. Stop waiting, start acting, and let today be the ordinary, unremarkable beginning of the life that has been waiting this entire time for you to finally pick up the responsibility and the power that were always yours to carry.